everyone. Thanks for joining us for today's Google Hangout, Saving Local Tax Dollars Through Prevailing Wage Reform. With us are State Representative Ron Marsico, Chairman of the House Judiciary Committee, Representative David Millard of Columbia County, and Representative Stephen Bloom of Cumberland County. All three are sponsors of prevailing wage reform legislation. And also joining us is Mr. Ron Grutza of the Pennsylvania Association of Boroughs. Thanks again, all of you, for joining us here. Let me start out with Representative Bloom. You have a number of pieces of legislation to address the issue of prevailing wage. Can you briefly explain what we even mean by the prevailing wage law and why we have problems?
Sure, Tom. Back in 1961, the Prevailing Wage Act was first put into law in Pennsylvania, and then in 1963, the threshold was set. What it means is that any publicly funded construction project with a total cost of $25,000 or more has to be paid for by the taxpayers at what they call the prevailing wage. Well, the prevailing wage isn't actually the market prevailing wage that you would find if you were competitively bidding a project. In fact, it's a wage set by data that's collected by the Department of Labor and Industry, primarily from union-funded projects or union construction projects. And the bottom line is it increases the cost to the taxpayers of building these construction projects by anywhere in the ballpark of 10 to 40%, depending on the particular project in the particular area. So in other words, taxpayers are getting much less bang for their buck, to the tune of 10 to 40% less every time we do a public construction project in Pennsylvania. So you can see that it's, I've often used the phrase prevailing waste when I think about prevailing wage, because basically we're not getting our full dollar's worth from those taxpayer dollars when we try to build a project efficiently in Pennsylvania.
So really, prevailing wage is not the prevailing wage, especially for areas like central Pennsylvania and northern Pennsylvania and so forth.
Right, and there's also a lot of technical paperwork associated with bidding a prevailing wage project and building a prevailing wage project. So many times our local contractors in central Pennsylvania don't even want to get involved in these because of all the complexities and overhead and issues involved. So it really hurts the taxpayers and hurts our contractors throughout the more rural areas of Pennsylvania in particular.
Now, Representative Millard, you've introduced a bill that would increase the threshold of when prevailing wage law kicks in from $25,000 to $100,000. Talk about why that's necessary.
The threshold at $25,000 as it currently is, any project that a small municipality does will far exceed that $25,000. It just isn't possible for them to do the same level of work for $25,000 that they did in 1961 or 62. And the other thing that we find with raising this prevailing wage level to $100,000 is the fact that all of our local municipalities, and there are literally hundreds of them, many of them do not have an economic base, a commercial economic base, or a manufacturing base for which to draw taxes. Some of our local municipalities are located in the very rural areas of Pennsylvania. The only opportunity, the only avail that they have to do some of the projects that are on their books to be done is to raise local taxes. And when they're doing that, they're probably affecting farmers for the most part. In some of the rural areas, a lot of the aggregate of land is farmers, and a lot of the other aggregate of land may be state forest land. So I see that this will accomplish a lot of things for small municipalities to enable them to do the things that they do best and contain it within the cost and not affect a local tax increase.
Now, one of the issues that's really affecting municipalities, townships, boroughs, what have you, all over the state is that this prevailing wage is not just for new construction, but it's in maintenance of roads. And Representative Marsico, you've introduced legislation to correct that situation. Can you talk about that?
Yes, I will. Thanks for having us on. You know, one of the things that in 2006 that Governor Rendell did was he put in a new rules of PennDOT, new guidelines that would include maintenance, prevailing wage in the maintenance projects in our local municipalities. And that has been a devastating effect with our local municipalities with their tax dollars. The constant theme here is, as you're hearing, is that this is really affecting our local taxpayers' wallets, prevailing wage, and it's especially with not only the maintenance projects but across the board. Anytime a public works project is bid through the state, prevailing wage kicks in. With the maintenance projects, many of our municipalities are stretched. They can't do the projects that they would like to do because they don't have the dollars to do it, because of the fact that prevailing wage has really hurt their budgets big time. So with that in mind, that and other pieces of legislation that I've done, we need to see some prevailing wage reform across the board, not just with the threshold, but for options to give municipalities the option to vote to opt in or opt out, and other types of legislation that would reform prevailing wage.
Now, Mr. Grutza, you are coming from the different perspective of representing the boroughs in Pennsylvania, and they, in fact, have were the reason this maintenance issue, for instance, kicked in. There was a borough out in western Pennsylvania that followed that case all the way to the Supreme Court of Pennsylvania. Talk about that.
Right. Sure. Thanks, Tom, for having me on today. And this is an issue that is preeminent with our membership. And I think with all municipalities across the state, because of the impact that it has on the revenues that and of course the projects that we're able to do. A little bit about the road maintenance and the history there. It did come from one small borough out in Westmoreland County, Youngwood Borough. And they had always put out and we're talking about projects which are a road resurfacing. So they'll strip off the first three inches of the worn out road and then put down a new surface, basically akin to peeling off your wall paint and repainting it. So in the past, it had always been defined, depending on what administration it was, that this was maintenance, which should be left out of the prevailing wage mandate. So the borough of Youngwood, relying on PennDOT's interpretation of what maintenance is, they bid their project. They're just trying to keep their roads up and get some new surface on there. So they bid it out non-prevailing wage, and they were challenged, and the Department of Labor and Industry, through the Prevailing Wage Appeals Board, found that they were that they broke the law in terms of the prevailing wage, and that it had to be bid with the higher wages for this road resurfacing project. So, in long and short of it, the borough appealed, and it went to the Supreme Court. Unfortunately, the decision came down that these types of projects had to be bid prevailing wage, which in the long run, that means that municipalities can do less mileage of road resurfacing, and it impacts the taxpayer because they got to shell out more for these types of projects, and we can only do so many miles of roads, whereas if Representative Marsko's bill was passed, House Bill 665, we would be able to do more with less. So that's why we're supporting House Bill 665.
Now, Representative Millard, this issue that the whole prevailing wage issue, but the thresholds in particular came up a couple years ago or last year and fell by a very close margin. What's your expectation with your bill going forward, and what are you hearing from your township and other borough and other officials?
I've received a lot of letters of support from my townships and other townships across the state. They ultimately would like to see it go according to the inflationary index, which brings it up to over 190,000, closer to 200,000, with an inflationary index in it. However, having looked at the past couple of legislative sessions and the bills that were introduced regarding prevailing wage, they didn't pass at the higher amounts. But that doesn't erase the dilemma that the smaller townships face in trying to do some maintenance projects. So, you know, when you realize that you can't win the war, you hope to win a battle. And that's exactly what I'm trying to do here, is to provide that necessary assistance. It may not be exactly what we want it to be, ideally. However, at $100,000, I happen to believe, and I know that there's a lot of letters of support that have come in to me that also believe that it will be of great value and great help and great assistance to those small townships.
Representative Marsico, you've, as I mentioned, you've been involved with this issue for years. How do you see this strategy going forward? What would you predict, knowing that it's somewhat dangerous to try to predict, but how would you see legislative action on this?
You know, I've been, like I said, dealing with 25 years, and I lived prevailing wage. My business, landscape contractor. I bid prevailing wage projects, so I saw firsthand the amount of cost that it would cost the taxpayers, it cost businesses, the administrative cost. If you did a prevailing wage project, you have administrative cost within your business, and also the taxpayers paying for that rate, which is sometimes most of the time 2 to 2.5 times more than the market rate. So it's an issue that I'll continue to fight. Hopefully we can get something done this session in the next few weeks, even with this transportation funding bill that's coming before us. We could just amend my bill, or the threshold bill, or the option bill, or some kind of reform. Would be a huge step for the taxpayers.
Representative Bloom, we've heard from municipal officials that this is a hassle, not just a cost, but a hassle in terms of paperwork. And I know one of you alluded to that already. But how do you see going forward? What are your predictions here?
Tom, can I make one point I intended to make earlier, just to clarify for anybody who's watching the Hangout today? Prevailing wage is not the same thing as minimum wage. I know there's been some confusion out there sometimes in the public mind. We're talking about individuals on these jobs who are getting paid typically far above the minimum wage, and we're not talking about knocking the minimum wage down for anyone. It's a separate issue, completely different, and just very important for people to understand. Prevailing wage and minimum wage, two completely different rules. Prevailing wage is what inflates the cost of public construction projects. Minimum wage is a completely separate rule for how much you get paid for each hour you work as a minimum. Doesn't usually even affect these jobs. So that's a key point. Where we go from here, it's key that our township officials, our borough officials, our county officials, our school board officials keep letting their legislators know how important this is. Because I hear from them all the time, I'm behind these bills, I'm supporting these bills fully, but they've got to help encourage other representatives and senators who may not understand the issue or realize how much this issue is impacting our taxpayers. Help make sure they know how important this is to move it right now, get behind these bills right now, whether it's Representative Millard's bill, Representative Marsico's bill, or other bills that are out there that would provide some serious, substantial reform to this outdated, outmoded prevailing wage.
Thank you, Representative Bloom. That's a perfect segue to a close here, and I just want to let everybody know that if they want further information about this whole issue, they can go to the website www.fixprevailingwage.com. And this video is posted there, but there's a lot of other interesting material and information. So hope you'll go there, and hope you'll support this effort. Thanks again for joining us for this Google Hangout, Saving Local Tax Dollars Through Prevailing Wage Reform. Have a good day.